picture this scenario for a second. You're driving to work, or maybe you're sitting in your home office just sort of staring into the middle distance right behind your monitor.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. And you take a look around at your life. You have reached what looks like the absolute summit of a really well-lived career.
Right.
You've put in the grueling hours, you have checked, all the right boxes.
You secured the titles.
The titles, the compensation, the equity. You have acquired all those external markers of what society confidently, almost aggressively labels a successful life.
A bulletproof life, really.
Exactly. And by all accounts, you should feel incredible. You should feel like you have unequivocally won the game. And yet, there is this specific quiet crisis striking you right at that summit.
It's like a persistent, hollow resonance.
A hollow resonance, yeah. You have everything you aim for, but there is this inescapable gnawing feeling that something vital is missing. You might even feel a profound sense of guilt for feeling this way.
Because from the outside looking in, complaining just seems crazy.
Right. But the stack of research we are looking at today tells us that this feeling is not a failure of achievement. It is not you being ungrateful or greedy. It is actually a deeply functional signal from your own psyche.
It's a signal that the real work of becoming who you are meant to be has only just begun.
Yes. And I think that is such a vital reframing.
It really is, because it shifts the entire paradigm from pathology, like, oh, what's wrong with me, to potential. It is the exact moment you realize that the external summit you just climbed was really just a base camp for the internal mountain.
A base camp. I love that.
You haven't reached the end of the journey, You've just finally acquired the resources to begin the real one.
And that brings us perfectly to the mission of today's deep dive. We are talking about self-actualization. Now, I want to be incredibly clear right out of the gate here. We are explicitly separating this from the modern, watered-down, toxic positivity self-help buzzwords that get thrown around on social media.
Yeah, please.
We are not talking about taking a weekend wellness retreat, drinking some overpriced green juice, and suddenly vibrating at a higher frequency.
No, not at all.
The mission of this deep dive is to rigorously unpack the lifelong psychological architecture required to truly flourish and fulfill your unique potential. To do this, we have a phenomenal stack of sources in front of us.
A really dense stack.
Very dense. We are pulling from excerpts of an article titled Beyond the Summit, 5 Surprising Truths About Becoming Your Most Authentic Self. We also have a foundational psychological guide on the topic. And we have a comprehensive synthesis of behavioral science notes that detail the specific empirical psychological factors of self-actualization.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We are going to distill the key takeaways from all of these texts to give you a legitimate, rigorous roadmap for this journey.
And it is crucial to establish the right tone for this exploration right from the start. As our behavioral science notes explicitly point out, this journey toward self-actualization is not a fixed destination. It is not a trophy to be shelved alongside your degrees or your professional accolades. It's a dynamic, ongoing process of becoming.
Becoming, so it's active.
Very active.
Okay.
It is the rigorous, lifelong drive to realize your latent talents and capabilities to their fullest extent, moving way beyond mere satisfaction toward a state of profound authenticity. You don't just arrive at self-actualization, plant a flag, and then, retire to the beach.
Right, you don't beat the game.
Exactly. It is a continuous, sometimes agonizing unfolding.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to navigate this terrain, our sources tell us we have to look past the superficiality of modern optimization. We have to start at the bedrock.
The absolute foundation.
So let's talk about the modern narrative that is shoved down our throats constantly, which is hustle culture. You see these guys posting at 3 a.m. on social media about taking ice baths and drinking raw egg yolks to unlock their flow state.
While completely ignoring the fact that their cortisol levels are probably through the roof.
Right. Because they haven't slept since Tuesday. Hustle culture demands that if you want peak performance, if you want to grow, you have to sacrifice your sleep, you have to sacrifice stability, and you have to sacrifice social connection.
The old sleep when you're dead mentality.
Exactly. But the behavioral science synthesis completely dismantles this. They introduce what is called the stability paradox, rooted in Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes, the stability paradox is the absolute fulcrum of this entire discussion. The modern narrative suggests you can brute force your way to your highest potential through sheer willpower and sleep deprivation.
Just grind it out.
Right. However, psychological theory reveals this to be a fundamental impossibility. Self-actualization simply does not occur in a vacuum. It is, in fact, the crowning achievement of a developmental scaffolding.
A scaffolding that requires your foundational needs to be relatively satisfied first.
Precisely. Now, since we are all generally familiar with Maslow's base layers, the obvious, non-negotiable necessity of food, water, and shelter, let's look at the actual friction point where most high achievers get stuck.
Because they aren't usually starving.
No, the modern trap isn't usually starving in the literal sense. The modern trap is getting stuck at the safety or esteem layers, confusing societal applause or a bloated bank account with actual fulfillment.
Let's drill into that friction point.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about safety and security needs in a modern context, we're talking about financial stability, predictability, and freedom from chronic anxiety, right?
Absolutely.
And when we talk about esteem, we are talking about the need for respect, recognition, and status. So it becomes glaringly obvious why the growth hack mentality fails spectacularly when it comes to true actualization.
It completely collapses.
If you are trying to unlock your deepest artistic potential or lead a company with profound visionary empathy, but you are chronically sleep-deprived, constantly terrified of losing your market share, and alienating your friends and family to work 90-hour weeks,
You're essentially trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of loose sand.
you cannot skip the developmental scaffolding.
You absolutely cannot bypass it, and the neuroscience backing this up is undeniable. When you are experiencing severe financial anxiety, or when you are navigating a highly toxic social environment at work, your brain doesn't differentiate that from a physical predator.
It's all just a tiger in the bushes.
Exactly. It interprets this as a profound threat to your safety and belonging. The amygdala fires up, and you get locked into a sympathetic nervous system response.
A survival state.
A survival state. And what happens is your cognitive resources literally tunnel. You become entirely preoccupied with scarcity.
Just getting by.
Yes. The prefrontal cortex, which handles higher-order thinking, creativity, and long-term planning, is functionally downregulated. You physically cannot actualize when your brain is dodging perceived lions.
There's a crucial quote from the sources that hits this perfectly. It says, "Financial stress or toxic relationships can hinder progress." It sounds so simple, but when you look at the neuroscience, it's profound.
It's biological reality.
I think that is the most validating thing someone listening to this can hear. When your brain is screaming for security, it is physically and psychologically impossible to focus on expansion.
You can't ponder your highest purpose in life or your deepest authentic values when your nervous system is trapped in fight or flight.
Your energy is entirely consumed by the crisis of the immediate moment. You are just trying to keep the lights on, literally or metaphorically.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the literature emphasizes that these lower-level deficiency needs don't have to be perfectly, flawlessly met forever before you can grow.
Okay, so it's not about achieving absolute perfection.
No. It's not about waiting until your life is absolutely pristine. That's impossible. But they must be relatively satisfied. When basic survival, security, social connection, and a sense of accomplishment are stable enough, they free up the immense mental and emotional bandwidth that is otherwise drained by chronic anxiety.
And that bandwidth is what you need to actually grow.
Precisely. Only then does the drive for profound authenticity and higher personal growth truly begin to take center stage. You have to patch the holes in the boat before you can navigate by the stars.
So I want to pause right here and ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own life in this exact moment. Think about the ambitions you hold for yourself, the potential you are desperately trying to unlock. Are you trying to reach your highest purpose while your nervous system is stuck in survival mode?
It's a tough question to ask.
It is. Are you demanding peak creativity from yourself while neglecting your basic physiological need for sleep? Are you seeking profound self-actualization while staying in a toxic environment that drains your emotional security every single day?
You have to build the base camp before you can summit the mountain.
You must stabilize the foundation.
And that stabilization is merely the prerequisite. Once the nervous system is calm, you can take the first truly active step of the actualization journey, which requires turning the gaze inward.
Which brings us to the inner mirror. Once that foundation is relatively stable, the texts say the critical starting point for becoming your authentic self is cultivating radical self-awareness and radical self-acceptance.
The term radical is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. We're not talking about superficial self-knowledge, like knowing you prefer introversion over extroversion or what your Enneagram type is.
Not your Hogwarts house.
Right. Exactly. Radical self-awareness requires identifying your true, unvarnished values, your actual strengths, your genuine, undeniable weaknesses, and your most authentic desires.
It's an intense, unflinching look in the mirror.
And the developmental literature points out that this is not a passive process. Wisdom does not just magically happen to you as you accrue
I
birthdays.
wish you did.
We all do. But it requires deliberate, often painful, introspective practices. The psychological frameworks highlight things like deep narrative journaling, intensive meditation, and rigorous psychotherapy as essential tools to clarify what they call the inner compass. You have to actively excavate this knowledge.
And it makes complete sense why it requires such active, deliberate excavation. From the time we are born, we are layered with external expectations. Our parents implicitly or explicitly tell us what a respectable career is.
The culture tells us what success or beauty looks like.
Exactly. We absorb these narratives so deeply and so early that they start to feel perfectly synonymous with our own thoughts. Radical self-awareness is the agonizing process of peeling back those inherited, calcified layers to see what is actually underneath.
It's an unlearning process.
But let me push back on this for a second. When we peel back those layers, we don't just find our shiny, perfect, authentic attributes. We find our deep flaws.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
find our laziness, our jealousy, our pettiness. So when the literature talks about the second half of this equation, radical self-acceptance, isn't that just a convenient excuse for complacency?
How so?
Like, hey, I'm naturally abrasive and deeply impatient. That's just my authentic self. Deal with it. Where is the line between radical acceptance and just giving up on improving yourself?
That is the exact friction point where most people misunderstand this concept. Radical self-acceptance is absolutely not resignation.
Okay.
Resignation is saying, I am flawed, therefore I cannot change, so I won't try. Self-acceptance is saying, I am currently exhibiting this flaw, I acknowledge it completely without shame, and because I see clearly, I can now work with it.
So it's about clear vision, not giving up.
Yes. The synthesis of behavioral science notes brings in some heavyweight psychological theory here to explain this distinction, specifically referencing Carl Rogers' concept of cultivating congruence.
Congruence.
Right. Congruence is the alignment between your internal reality and your external actions. When you are hiding your flaws, suppressing them, or pretending to be someone you are not just to please others, you are in a state of incongruence.
And that's exhausting.
It causes immense, chronic psychological friction. You are burning energy just to maintain the mask.
And that ties perfectly into the literature they cite from Kristen Neff on self-compassion. This is so counterintuitive to the typical high achiever type A mindset. We are culturally conditioned to believe that being relentlessly hard on ourselves, punishing ourselves for our flaws with a brutal inner monologue, is the only way to drive improvement. We think the inner critic is our competitive advantage.
But Neff's research and the broader literature on self-actualization shows that self-flagellation actually triggers the brain's threat defense system.
Yeah.
It hinders learning.
Working with your authentic self, offering yourself the same compassion you would a friend when you fail, rather than constantly fighting against your nature or trying to beat it into a different shape, is what actually creates the neuroplastic environment required for growth.
Think about the sheer, staggering amount of energy wasted on inner conflict. If you are constantly at war with your own nature, relentlessly judging your perceived weaknesses, and maintaining a defensive, rigid posture against your own insecurities, you have zero cognitive or emotional bandwidth left for actualization.
You are spending all your capital fighting a civil war inside your own head.
Letting go of that negativity and overcoming that internal self-doubt isn't just about feeling warm and fuzzy. It is an absolute biological and functional necessity for emotional freedom. It clears the runway for true potential to take flight.
I want to give you, the listener, a practical way to apply this inner mirror concept right now because it can sound very abstract. The researchers suggest using guided, disruptive questions to penetrate the noise of your own rationalizations.
What's an example of one of those?
One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself today is, what would I do right now if fear weren't a factor? If the fear of societal judgment, the fear of financial ruin, or the fear of disappointing your family suddenly vanished into thin air, what choices would you make?
That cuts right through the noise.
Another powerful exercise is to audit your own negative self-talk. Next time you drop the ball on a project or make a mistake, stop and listen to what the voice in your head is actually saying. Is it a voice of radical self-acceptance saying, okay, we messed up, let's analyze why and fix it? Or is it a hard, punitive voice inherited from a critical parent or a toxic boss?
These are the real-time introspective practices that build that radical self-awareness. And the reason this internal clarity is so vital, the reason we spend so much focusing on it, is that it serves as the foundational operating system for the next stage of the journey.
Right.
Once you know who you truly are and you accept the totality of it without defensiveness, you completely change how you navigate external reality.
So what does this all mean? How does all of this deep, internal, seemingly isolated reflection actually translate into external action in the real world?
Hmm.
This is where the actualized self begins to sharply, sometimes uncomfortably, diverge from the rest of the pack.
It's a major divergence.
The texts tell us that self-actualized people possess a very rare, potent brand of autonomy. They operate according to an internal law. They become remarkably less dependent on external validation. They are largely unaffected by the shifting tides of public opinion, and they simply do not bow to societal pressures.
This concept of the internal law is fascinating, and it is entirely backed by empirical models. To understand the mechanics of it, the behavioral science notes direct us to self-determination theory.
Which was pioneered by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan.
Yes, Deci and Ryan. This theory is a cornerstone of modern motivation science. It emphasizes that true autonomy is the absolute prerequisite for intrinsic motivation. Let's break that down.
Okay.
Most of the population operates heavily on extrinsic motivation. They do things to get a reward, to gain applause, to make money, or to avoid punishment. They are externally regulated.
Their locus of control is entirely outside themselves.
Exactly. Self-actualizing individuals undergo a profound psychological shift. They transition from relying on external motivation to relying almost entirely on intrinsic motivation. They do things because the action itself is inherently fulfilling and aligned with their core values.
They trust their own experiences and their own deeply vetted judgments above the wisdom of the crowd.
Yes, they are no longer walking into a room and scanning it to see what everyone else is doing or thinking before they make a move. They are looking inward to that inner compass they clarified during the radical self-awareness phase.
But I want to head off a common misconception here. This intense independence is not just a quirky social preference.
No, and it is certainly not sociopathy or narcissism.
Right, because that's where people often get confused. I'm just doing me, they say, while being awful to everyone.
Exactly. But true autonomy is deeply rooted in a rigorously tested moral compass. The notes bring in moral psychology here, specifically referencing the work of Jonathan Haidt. Haidt's work on moral foundations shows that self-actualized individuals act in alignment with universal values.
Concepts like justice, truth, fairness, and beauty.
And the hallmark of this state is ethical integrity. They will take actions that align with these values even when those actions are highly unpopular, financially ruinous, or disadvantageous to them socially.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's a crucial distinction. If you just ignore society and do whatever you want without that moral framework, you aren't self-actualized, you're just a menace.
You're just destructive.
But the actualized person can perfectly distinguish between the means and the ends, and they will not compromise their internal ethics just to appease the crowd or secure a short-term win. There's a specific quote directly from the source synthesis that encapsulates this perfectly.
Let's hear it.
It says, "Making choices aligned with your values rather than external pressures or expectations helps you develop authenticity and personal agency."
That phrase, personal agency, is the entire ballgame. When you conform to external pressures, when you operate on audience capture in your real life, you are actively surrendering your agency.
You're letting the algorithm of society drive the car.
When you act according to your internal law, regardless of the friction it causes, you take the wheel. You become the definitive author of your own existence.
So let's bring this right to you, the listener. Where in your life are you currently, perhaps unknowingly, surrendering your agency? I challenge you to look closely at your daily choices, especially the ones you rationalize as just how things are done.
Because that's the easiest excuse.
It is. Are you conforming to the pressures of hyperconsumerism? Buying things you don't actually care about just to signal status to people you barely tolerate? Are you trapped in the comparison game on LinkedIn or Instagram, letting a literal algorithm dictate your sense of professional or personal self-worth?
The path of self-actualization demands that you fiercely question these societal expectations, burn away the extrinsic motivations, and begin making choices based purely on your own internal, authentic values. This raises an important question, though, and it's one that often causes a lot of anxiety for people stepping onto this path. If someone is operating with this intense, almost intimidating degree of radical autonomy, if they are so fiercely independent that they genuinely do not rely on external validation or societal approval, how on earth does that affect their relationships?
Right, do they just become a hermit?
Does committing to self-actualization just lead to total, uncompromising isolation? Do you just become a monk on a mountain?
That is the ultimate tension, isn't it? Because on the surface, it sounds like an unsolvable paradox. How can someone be fiercely, radically independent, guided only by their internal law, and yet still remain deeply, warmly connected to humanity?
It seems like a contradiction.
But the answer, according to the research, lies in fundamentally changing the underlying reason we seek out relationships in the first place. This brings us to the dynamic of solitude, connection, and the village.
The researchers make a highly counterintuitive observation here. Self-actualized individuals are profoundly, exceptionally comfortable with solitude. They do not view being alone as a state of lack, deprivation, or loneliness.
This is not a punishment.
Instead, they actively crave and utilize this time for deep reflection, creative synthesis, and cognitive rest. Because they have done the grueling work of radical self-acceptance we talked about earlier, they are completely at peace in their own company. Their mind is a pleasant place to be.
And this comfort with solitude is actually the magic key to their relationships. Think about it. Because they are completely comfortable alone, because they are internally regulated, they do not use other people to fill an internal void.
That's the pivot.
They aren't seeking out a romantic partner just to validate their attractiveness or worth. They aren't surrounding themselves with a massive entourage of friends just to drown out the silence of their own thoughts. They aren't using people as emotional crutches or mirrors. Therefore, their relationships are born entirely out of pure choice, rather than desperate neediness.
That distinction changes the entire texture and geometry of a relationship. When a connection is born of choice rather than a deficit or need, the quality of the connection skyrockets.
The sources note that these individuals do not have massive, sprawling networks of superficial acquaintances. Instead, they form a smaller circle of deep, highly empathetic, and exceptionally qualitative relationships.
Quality over quantity in the extreme.
These connections are characterized by profound honesty, because neither party is performing a role, walking on eggshells, or wearing a mask to secure validation.
The behavioral science notes bring Carl Rogers back into the conversation here, specifically leveraging his famous concept of unconditional positive regard.
Which is a beautiful concept.
Yes. In therapeutic terms, unconditional positive regard means offering complete, non-judgmental acceptance and support to another person exactly as they are without them needing to earn it. Because self-actualized people have successfully extended this radical acceptance to themselves, they have the immense emotional capacity to extend it to others.
They cultivate environments where their loved ones feel entirely safe to be fully authentic. But wait, let me play devil's advocate again, because unconditional positive regard can sound like a recipe for getting walked all over. Where's the line between extending radical acceptance and just enabling someone's toxic or self-destructive behavior? If my friend's acting terribly, shouldn't I judge that behavior?
It's a vital distinction. Unconditional positive regard means you accept the person fundamentally, but it does not mean you validate every action. A self-actualized person can say, I love and accept you completely as a human being, but the way you are behaving right now is destructive and I will not participate in it.
So the boundary is actually firmer.
The boundary is actually much firmer because it's not clouded by the fear of losing the relationship. They aren't afraid to have the hard, honest conversation. And the developmental research supports this. The notes specifically reference findings from the famous Grant study.
That's the Harvard study on adult development that tracked men for over 75 years, right?
Exactly. The absolute clearest finding from that massive data set was that relational health, specifically the quality and depth of relationships rather than the quantity, is the greatest predictor of lifelong flourishing. The self-actualized person perfectly balances intense, sovereign independence with profound interdependence.
They know they can stand alone, but they joyfully choose to stand together. It's also worth noting what the expert synthesis says about the cultural context of all this, because psychology has historically had a very Western, individualistic bias.
Indeed, the literature explicitly points out that the manifestation of self-actualization is heavily influenced by global and cultural contexts. The deep, almost aggressive emphasis on individual autonomy that we see in Western psychological frameworks looks quite different in collectivist societies.
It plays out differently on the ground.
In a collectivist culture, the highest realization of the self might place a much heavier emphasis on communal achievement, maintaining complex social harmony, and beautifully fulfilling one's role within the larger social fabric, rather than purely individual expression or rebellion.
However, the underlying psychological mechanism operating authentically, intentionally, and meaningfully, rather than out of fear, ego, or superficial conformity, remains exactly the same. So, listener, audit your inner circle today. Look closely at the 5 people you spend the most time with. Do you have a supportive environment, a village of people who offer you that unconditional positive regard?
Do they accept your messy, authentic self while simultaneously challenging you to grow?
And just as importantly, look in the mirror. Are you offering that to them? Or are your relationships highly transactional, based on what you can do for each other to fill internal voids or advance your careers? True actualization requires a village that celebrates your autonomy rather than feeling threatened by it.
And that solid, secure village becomes absolutely essential support when you take the next, arguably most difficult step on this journey, which involves intentionally and repeatedly stepping out of your hard-won comfort zone.
Yes, and that brings us to the phenomenon of choosing the discomfort of growth and the flow state. Up until now, we've talked a lot about finding foundational stability, developing radical acceptance, and cultivating inner peace. Honestly, it sounds very zen. It sounds relaxing.
That sounds like the end of the road.
But the psychological texts draw a very sharp, vital, often overlooked distinction between self-fulfillment and self-actualization. Self-fulfillment is often described as a state of contentment. It is the feeling of having enough. You are satisfied, your bills are paid, you like your friends, you are comfortable.
But self-actualization is absolutely not about resting in comfort. It is characterized by an active, deliberate, continuous stretching of your potential.
This is a crucial pivot in the literature. It brings in the monumental work of psychologist Carol Dweck, specifically her concept of the growth mindset. Now, growth mindset has become a bit of a corporate buzzword, so let's look at the actual neuroscience Dweck's research uncovered.
Yes, the neurological data is fascinating here. When researchers look at brain activity, specifically the PA signal, which is the brain's electrical response to making a mistake, people with a fixed mindset show very little activity.
They make an error, they feel threatened, and they disengage.
But individuals operating with a true growth mindset show massive neurological activity when they make an error. Their brain lights up, processing the mistake as highly valuable data.
To actualize is to continuously make the conscious, deliberate choice to prioritize this kind of growth over the seductive gravitational pull of safety.
It requires a willingness to constantly step outside your comfort zone and embrace challenges where failure is a very real possibility. When you are pushing the boundaries of your capabilities, it is inherently deeply uncomfortable. You will feel awkward, you'll feel incompetent, you will encounter intense frustration.
But the mindset shift is realizing that this intense discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is actually a metric of progress. It is the feeling of the muscle tearing so it can rebuild stronger. If you are completely comfortable in your career, in your art, in your intellect, you are no longer growing.
You're just coasting on your previous achievement.
To actualize is to continuously choose the risk of the unknown over the comfort of the status quo. And this is where the sources introduce one of the most exciting phenomenological concepts in behavioral science.
Yes, the flow state, a concept pioneered by the brilliant psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is the practical, real-world application of your potential. It is the exact opposite of apathy or boredom. It is defined as the subjective experience of losing yourself entirely in a meaningful, highly challenging task.
Csikszentmihalyi mapped this extensively. In a flow state, your level of skill and the difficulty of the challenge are perfectly, exquisitely balanced.
If the challenge is too high for your skill, you feel anxiety. If your skill is too high for the challenge, you feel boredom. Flow exists in that narrow, thrilling channel right in the middle.
Let's paint a picture of what flow actually looks like in real life, because it is something we have all felt fleeting glimpses of, and it feels like magic. Think of a painter who stands in front of a canvas at 9:00 a.m., starts mixing colors, and suddenly realizes the light has changed, the sun is setting, and they haven't eaten or taken a sip of water all day.
They were so utterly absorbed in the cognitive and physical challenge of creating the art that time literally ceased to exist for them.
Or think of a software programmer trying to solve a complex, frustrating algorithmic puzzle. entering a state of hyper-focus where the rest of the world, the noise of the office, the notifications on their phone completely fade away until the code clicks into place.
Or an athlete in the middle of a championship game where every movement happens instinctively, without conscious thought, completely in the zone. That is flow.
And what Csikszentmihalyi discovered in his massive cross-cultural studies is that flow doesn't happen when we are relaxing on a beach sipping a margarita. Humans actually report lower levels of happiness during passive leisure than they do during intense, goal-oriented work.
Flow happens when we are stretching our capabilities to their absolute cognitive or physical limit in pursuit of a meaningful goal. It is the ultimate manifestation of choosing the discomfort of growth, because the task must be challenging enough to require every ounce of your capacity.
The prefrontal cortex temporarily downregulates.
A process called transient hypofrontality, which is why your inner critic shuts up and time distorts.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What is the long-term psychological reward for enduring this discomfort and pushing yourself repeatedly into these flow states? It's not just that you get better at a skill or that you produce better work,
It fundamentally alters the baseline of how you experience the world.
which leads us to the phenomenon of peak experiences and childlike freshness. The psychological texts describe these as the most profound, undeniable markers of the actualized self.
Yes, Abraham Maslow originally coined the term peak experiences, and it remains one of the most heavily studied aspects of optimal human psychology. He defined them as fleeting, incredibly transformative moments of intense joy, awe, creativity, or transcendence.
During a peak experience, an individual often feels a profound sense of unity with the universe. The rigid boundaries between the self and the external world temporarily dissolve.
It is a moment of pure, unadulterated connection to the cosmos, stripped of all ego.
The sources use a specific phrase here that I absolutely love and resonates so deeply. A childlike freshness of appreciation for the simple, staggering wonders of existence. Think about how a toddler looks at a caterpillar, or a sudden thunderstorm, or a new color.
They're entirely consumed by awe. They aren't thinking about their mortgage or their emails.
As adults, we get so burdened by rigid norms, endless routines, and the crushing mundanity of daily obligations that we lose that freshness. The world becomes a gray checklist of things to survive. But the self-actualized person, through their autonomy and their pursuit of flow, manages to reclaim that awe.
They can look at a sunset they've seen 1,000 times and be moved to tears by it.
And the researchers are very careful to point out that these are not just fleeting, hallucinatory, happy moments to be enjoyed and then forgotten. They're not merely recreational. They serve a highly critical developmental function.
These peak experiences provide sudden, massive injections of clarity. Neurologically, experiences of profound awe actually quiet the default mode network in the brain, which is the area responsible for our ego and our rumination.
They act as a hard reset for your consciousness, offering glimpses into your highest potential. The awe generated in these moments sustains the individual, providing the deep emotional fuel necessary for the long-term, arduous work of personal evolution.
They act as a visceral, undeniable reminder that the world is not merely a collection of mundane obligations and stress, but a theater of profound connection, beauty, and possibility.
So, listener, ask yourself, when was the last time you felt a true, overwhelming, stop-you-in-your-tracks sense of awe? When was the last time you experienced that childlike freshness and absolute spontaneity? Was it while you were completely unplugged, walking in deep nature?
Was it standing in front of an incredible piece of art, or listening to a piece of live music that gave you chills down your spine?
Was it in a moment of deep, unspoken, profound connection with someone you love? If it has been a long time, if your life feels like an endless spreadsheet of tasks, how can you intentionally cultivate more of these moments? Because these aren't just luxuries for the weekend. The behavioral scientists are saying they are the absolute fuel for your actualization.
And as you accumulate this fuel, as you grow stronger and more secure in your autonomy, and as you experience these moments of profound connection and awe, a very paradoxical, almost miraculous shift begins to happen within the architecture of the psyche.
Which brings us to our final major paradigm shift today. The ego's exit, also known in the psychological literature as task centering and the mission. This is, without a doubt, the most counterintuitive, mind-bending truth of self-actualization.
It really is.
Think about it. Everything we have talked about so far, building your foundation, radical self-awareness, deeply trusting your internal law, finding your own personal flow state sounds intensely self-focused. It sounds like a highly intellectualized version of me, me, me.
But the data is clear. To truly actualize the self, you must ultimately transcend the ego entirely.
This is the ultimate beautiful irony of human development presented in the synthesis. While the term self-actualization literally contains the word self and implies an intense internal focus, the individuals who actually reach and sustain this state are characterized by a definitive, unwavering outward gaze.
They exhibit what psychologists call task centering. This means they become completely, deeply devoted to a mission in life, a specific, complex problem outside themselves, or a cause they deeply believe in that extends far, far beyond their own immediate needs, their comfort, or their personal glory.
We're talking about dedicating yourself to humanitarian causes, pushing the boundaries of groundbreaking scientific research, monumental creative endeavors that challenge the culture, or relentlessly dedicating yourself to building a marginalized community. The specific domain of the task doesn't matter nearly as much as the psychological orientation toward it.
The expert synthesis brings in the monumental work of Viktor Frankl here, the renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who developed logotherapy. And we cannot gloss over this because it is the linchpin of the whole theory.
Viktor Frankl's work is absolutely essential to understanding this final stage. Logotherapy is founded on the premise that human beings are driven primarily by a will to meaning.
The fundamental desire to find profound purpose in life. Frankl observed this under the most horrific, unimaginable conditions in the concentration camps. He noted a deeply profound paradox. The prisoners who relied merely on empty optimism, the ones who simply hoped they would be released by Christmas, were often the ones who perished when Christmas came and went and their hopes were crushed. Their internal structure collapsed.
But the individuals who could connect their existence to a future-focused task, a scientist who needed to survive to finish a manuscript, a father who needed to survive to reunite with a child, someone who found meaning in secretly comforting others, those were the ones who maintained their psychological integrity. Task centering is the practical application of this will to meaning.
So the ultimate takeaway here is that if you want to become the most profound, deeply developed, actualized version of yourself, you absolutely do not do it by staring at your own reflection in the mirror forever. The self-help industry wants you to endlessly obsess over your own healing, your own optimization, your own brand, but the psychological data says that is a dead end.
What's fascinating here is the concept of paradoxical intent. Personal growth, at its absolute highest levels, happens almost entirely as a byproduct of your contribution to the world. You cannot aim directly at self-actualization. You must aim at a meaningful task, and actualization is what happens to you along the way.
By focusing all of your hard-won energy, your flow states, and your radical autonomy on solving external problems and giving back to humanity, you inadvertently achieve the highest possible levels of internal integration. You grow inward most effectively and most powerfully when you are relentlessly looking outward. The fragile, demanding ego steps aside, and the work, the contribution, becomes everything.
That is just mind-blowing. It's a paradigm-shifting way to look at success.
Yeah.
It completely flips the script of our modern, hyper-individualistic consumer culture on its head.
It truly does. It permanently moves the goalpost from the narcissistic, what can I acquire from the world, to the profoundly integrated, what can I contribute to the world with the unique, actualized potential I have developed.
As we transition into our outro, let's comprehensively recap the core tenets of this incredible, demanding journey we've mapped out today. We started with the absolute biological necessity of building the foundation, meeting those physiological and safety needs, rejecting the sleep-deprived hustle culture so your brain isn't locked in a scarcity survival mode.
From there, we talked about developing radical self-awareness and self-acceptance, using the inner mirror to find your authentic values, and stopping the internal civil war.
We explored cultivating the radical autonomy to live by your internal law, free from the incredibly strong gravitational pull of external validation and audience capture.
We discussed the paradox of embracing solitude to build deeper, healthier, non-transactional connections in your village based on unconditional positive regard.
We highlighted the critical neurological importance of choosing the discomfort of growth and chasing the flow state. We talked about how experiencing profound awe and peak experiences act as the emotional fuel for the journey.
And finally, the ultimate paradox. Transcending the ego entirely through task centering and dedicating yourself to a mission far beyond the self.
It is an incredibly rigorous path. It demands everything of you. And the sources provide a statistic that is quite sobering, but I think also incredibly clarifying. Decades of psychological research suggest that this state of true, sustained self-actualization is remarkably rare.
Currently, it is estimated that only about 1 to 2% of the human population consistently operates at this highest level of psychological integration.
1 to 2%. That's a staggering number. Now, we are not sharing that statistic to be discouraging or elitist. Quite the opposite. We are framing this as a profound call to arms. It highlights the stark reality that living a life of profound authenticity and impact doesn't just happen by accident.
It doesn't happen just because you age. It requires radical, lifelong dedication.
It requires the immense daily courage to remain open to disruptive experiences, to constantly fiercely question the societal status quo, and to willingly, repeatedly choose the agonizing discomfort of growth over the incredibly easy, seductive comfort of safety. It is unquestionably hard work, but it is undeniably the most meaningful work a human being can undertake.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we have synthesized today. We've established that self-actualization requires stepping outside of societal pressures and learning to deeply trust your own internal law. I want you to look back at the narrative arc of your life.
Could it be that the moments in your past that you previously labeled as embarrassing rebellions, or the times you felt a painful, agonizing failure to fit in with your peers or your corporate culture, were not actually failures at all?
Could it be that those moments of friction were actually your psyche's first clumsy, desperate attempts at breaking the mold and actualizing your true potential? If you reframe your past that way, realizing your internal law has been trying to guide you all along, what does it mean for you to consciously, purposefully choose growth over safety today?
That is an incredibly powerful question to carry with you into your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of the authentic self. We warmly encourage you to keep questioning the inherited narratives, keep deliberately stepping into the discomfort of growth, and keep exploring your own boundless, unique potential.